Hey, what's up everybody? John Loehle here, and today we're going to continue the 5-Minute Friday discussion with how to edit a photo. Taking photos is half the fun of photography, but then editing those photos to make them exactly how you saw them or putting your own creative twist on the photos is the other half of the fun. Adobe Lightroom is a software I personally use about 75% of the time for photo organizing and editing, and is probably the most popular program for those two tasks. The rest of my time is spent in Adobe's Photoshop CC. I've been using Lightroom and Photoshop since 2015 and hope today to be able to pass along some of that knowledge to speed up your learning curve if you've only dealt with JPEG images like stuff that comes off of iPhones up until now. There are two main file types when it comes to creating photographs: JPEGs and RAWs. JPEG images are the end result of your camera taking in all the data from a composition, making adjustments that it thinks are proper based upon its algorithm, and then throwing away the excess data to create a small file size. The second main file type is called RAW. This is when the camera takes in all the data from the composition and puts it in a file for later perfecting in a photo editing software like Photoshop or Lightroom. While these files are larger, it allows the photographer or the retoucher to be able to add a style that's unique to that artist. Each camera manufacturer has its own RAW format. Nikon has the NEF RAW format, Canon has CRW, Sony has ARW, and Adobe even has its own RAW format that's unified called DNG. Adobe's DNG RAW format is unique because a Nikon, Canon, or Sony camera can all be converted to a DNG. Adobe has a trial version of both Lightroom and Photoshop in something called the Photography Plan. If you like the software like I do, after the trial it's only $9.99 a month, which is roughly what a Netflix subscription is. A link to the trial is in the description below. Now obviously I'm not sponsored by Adobe with this small YouTube channel, but I really love their products to be able to create great photos and videos. So with that, let's hit it. So let's start with an example from a brand new Lightroom catalog. Once you've downloaded Lightroom CC and clicked on the icon down here, the first thing you'll see is a box prompting you to either create a new catalog or choose a different catalog. Since I have previously created a catalog in Lightroom, I'm going to select the Choose Different Catalog. And now I'm going to choose Create a New Catalog. For this example, we're going to call it Example Catalog. I'm going to just save it on my desktop for simplicity. And it's loading up. Once Lightroom opened, you will notice that it's pretty blank. This is because we need to add some photos to the catalog. So let's click the Import button down on the lower left-hand side of the screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see hard drives that are connected to your computer that contain recognizable photo files. For this example, I'm going to select the file folder on an external USB called No Name. On the right-hand side, we see build previews, and it could be either minimal, standard, one-to-one, or embedded in Sidecar. I'm going to select one-to-one, which allows me to zoom into the photo and see whether it's tack sharp, even if the photos are removed from the computer itself. The next thing that is useful is the keywords. In these two photos, they're both landscapes, and they are both taken in the fall, so that works. Generally, you want to have the keywords for kind of a Lightroom search engine. These keywords work, so let me just click Import. And you'll see up on the left-hand side, No Name now has two pictures in there. If I click on it, we'll see our two photos, and I can go down here or tap the G key on the keyboard to see grid view. And I can expand the thumbnails with the slider down here. Let's click the first photo. The right-hand side shows the metadata of the photo itself. This was taken with an ISO of 100, a focal distance of 16 millimeters, a f-stop or an aperture of f8, and a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. If we scroll further on down, we'll see both the keywords that we've added in at the import as well as more detailed metadata, the file name, the title, caption, which we'll fill in later, as well as capture time, the actual dimensions, and the camera itself that was used for this. Initially, this photo looks close to properly exposed, but it's a little flat. Nothing really sticks out. This is how raw photos are supposed to look prior to editing. To do our edits, we're going to click the Develop tab, and then we're going to be using this right panel. The first thing that we're going to do is actually take into account any kind of distortions that the lens itself has. We click the Remove Chromatic Aberration and the Enable Profile Corrections. These will be minor selections, but will move any kind of distortion factors, and we saw how that lens actually popped. Now let's scroll back up to the Basic panel, where we see exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance, saturation, and then we have white balance and tint. These are the main things that we're going to focus on today. I like to start with bringing the highlights down a bit to be able to see what we can recover from the sky and then correcting from there. You can see by pulling the highlights down 100%, it's brought back the sky and also moved our color histogram. Next, I need to expose for the tree trunks. As you can see, they're a little underexposed, so I'll just bring in a little bit of light. But as you can see, I started to lose a little bit of the color detail in the trees. No worries. Next, I like to expose for whites. By clicking the Alt or Option key, you'll be able to see when the bright parts are truly blown out. And you can see it happening there on the left. I like to make sure that there's nothing blown out, so I wait for that to be completely blown, and then we're good to go. Same thing for the blacks. We'll click the Alt or Option key on a Mac. I like to have a little bit of exposure here. It's kind of more of an art than a science, but that looks about right. Next, I'm going to look at the vibrance, and I'm going to bump this up. Now, if you bump it up too far, it starts to look very HDR-like and pretty ugly. This is something you need to use in moderation. Generally, under +20 is where I like to stay. Something subtle, just to bring back those midtones. Then, depending on the photo, I like to bump a little bit of saturation in. We'll leave clarity alone for this. I'll save the tone curve for a future lesson, but just know that you can expose the tone curve for a more dynamic image when creating something with a wide dynamic range. So this photo, with the exception of a little higher amount of black, looks about perfect. So that about wraps it up. Please join me next week when we continue the 5 Minute Friday. Until then, keep shooting.